Today I'm going to run some errands and we'll talk about short stories. Okay, now that I've got coffee in hand, let's talk about stories. So I have always loved stories. From a little kid, I was really conscious of the fact that I loved reading. I don't know how many of you have had to have a family ban on reading at the dinner table, but I did. So I have always loved it. So I'm going to show you a couple of my favorites really fast, or just ones that were really impactful for me. So the first one is from Louisa May Alcott, and it's a collection of stories called A Garland for Girls. Now, I loved these stories when I was a kid. I still like going back to them. It's also really important to me because it was a gift from my grandmother to my mother. And so, yes, it's very old and a little beaten up, but I still love it. Another one that I love is Pride and Prejudice. My godfather, my uncle, and my aunt and their family gave this to me when I graduated high school. And this is probably my favorite classic story. Now, I've loved a lot of books over the years, but I don't know if I've loved any collection harder than I've loved this one by Mark Twain. And you can see the ravages of time because I have loved it so hard. And then this last one I'm going to show you is a collection of stories of mythology by Edith Hamilton. I love this for a lot of reasons. My brother and I just recently found out that he and I had, I think, the same third grade teacher, and she had this in her library, and both he and I hoarded it and were not very good sharers that year because we loved it so much. And so he and I both really love this one. So I have always had a really special place in my heart for stories and knew I was fascinated by the structure and just all of it. And I do think that every culture is enamored of stories. I think stories are the things that bind us. They're the things that help us pull the pieces of reality together. I think they can connect people across time and place. I mean, think of the early cave paintings. So people who've been gone hundreds, thousands upon thousands of years, their physical bodies might be gone, and even their thoughts might be gone. But their stories, that somehow stays. So maybe you're not someone who loves stories through one of these old books. Maybe you're someone who loves stories that you find through music, because most songs are written in a sort of narrative way. Or maybe you love poetry, or you love movies, or you're fascinated by TV, or whatever it is. We are constantly telling one another stories. And I think it's vital to our culture as well as to each individual. I think it's a really important part of how we process reality and how we connect with one another. Okay, while I am on my way to return an item to Kohl's, why don't you think of what stories were really meaningful to you when you were a kid? Stories are important as you're reading them, but they're also important long after. So I know that reading the Louisa May Alcott collection really shaped my morality when I was a kid. And I'm sure that Pride and Prejudice had an impact on how I view relationships. And Mark Twain probably influenced the way I developed my sense of humor. And the stories about mythology may have impacted how I view religion and spirituality. So let me show you a little bit what I mean about this lasting impact. So let's say that I'm in the bookstore, I'm just looking around, and I happen to see an author or a series that I've read before. And maybe it doesn't even make a huge impact on me while I'm standing here. But when I go and leave the bookstore and go about my day, that's when it starts to reverberate in my mind. Let's say I'm going to stop into a Michael's. So let's say I'm checking out their aisle that's already ready for Halloween. And I notice this skull. Oh, a little dragon. Now I'm going to see them everywhere. While at the car wash, and by the way, my car now smells like green apple. So good. I started thinking more about the story, and it started off simple, like, I wonder what the dragon eggs in the story would really look like in real life. And then I started thinking kind of more philosophical about what the author was trying to say. So there's a family that's very moral, the Starks. Things do not go very well for them early on. And then there's a family that seems pretty immoral, definitely bent on survival. You can definitely say that they're capitalists. And they seem to be doing pretty well grabbing power. So now I'm wondering, was the author in favor of the Stark family, very moral, or the Lannister family, which seemed to be more successful? And I wonder what I think about that.